Hi, welcome back to Writing Off the Deep End.
I'm Geoffrey Edwards.
And I'm Mary Thaler. And we're talking about characters.
Right, so
today.
Writing characters, how do you write them?
Yeah.
Do you love them? Do you hate them?
And we don't even need to say that characters are the most important part of storytelling. Would we say that right
aside from plot and setting,
Is it usually the first thing that you think of?
So when I plan a story, it's the message of what I want to say.
Yeah.
And the characters come right after that. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the book. Sometimes the plot comes first and sometimes the characters, but...
And it's a bit of a false distinction too. I mean, if you think of a plot as a situation, then the kind of character that would be involved in that situation it already gives you some clues about who this person
and once
is.
you have a character that's sort of partially in place, you can't just throw any plot at them, right?
Yeah.
There are things that you can let them do, and there are things that don't make sense for that character, right?
So it's a bit iterative.
Yeah.
You get your plot, which gives you your character, and from the moment you've got the character, then your plot is pretty well determined.
Well, not fully determined, but partially determined, yeah.
So, are there certain kinds of characters that appeal to you, that you find yourself writing again and again?
So, I have the villain in my science fiction story, and the villain isn't very much like me in a lot of different ways.
Okay. That was harder to do?
It was hard to enter into him as a character in order to write a story from a character's perspective, you have to enter into the character, and so if the character is not like you, you have to put yourself into their place in nonetheless, right? And I did find that difficult. In fact, that was one of the books that I rewrote completely. I had written 200 pages and I backed up and I restarted from scratch because the first cut at the thing didn't work at all. Yeah. And I had to restructure the story into a much less linear chronological order story in order to be able to tackle the complexities of the character. Yeah. Because it's one of these characters who's really the villain, and yet if you look at him under certain angles, you can see a very different side to the character. So it's part of the interest of the character, right? Yeah,
that complexity.
Right.
I think we do want to create complex characters.
Is
the goal,
and ones that causes us to challenge ourselves in interesting ways. Right? So, What about yourself? Have you created a character you don't like?
I think for me, the act of writing is a compassionate one. I mean, this character is someone that probably by the end of the writing project I've spent more time than with my regular friends. They become someone very close to me. I'm not saying that it's mean. I guess it's not meaningless to ask whether I like them, but the relationship with the character is a very close one.
So, what are the challenges of writing, let's say, a character that isn't quite a reflection of you?
It's quite challenging for me. And I worry about it, and I go through my writing, and I try to comfort myself with the thought that as a human being, obviously there's lots of aspects to me. I think I must be a reasonably complex, if only because all humans are fairly complex. So hopefully there's enough in me to generate lots of different characters. What if I had to write an alien species, though? That would be very challenging. You've written alien species.
Although I have issues with others, I'm not convinced that other intelligent life looks anything like a human being. No. Or even, does it have to be carbon-based? I don't know. But I have questions about those assumptions. Yeah.
And yet, no matter how strange you've made your character, if you made it non-carbon based or things that we can't even imagine, you would have to make it relatable. The
Right.
moment you've made it a character,
Yes.
you have to.
So
find a
I
way to
play
relate
with
to
things
it.
like an intelligence that's made out of many little units. You know, it's like ant colony kind of intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very different understanding of intelligence. You know, it's been done before, but it's interesting to play with those kinds of ideas about aliens.
Now, when I'm thinking about my characters, and in fact, I was doing this morning. I'm a bit stuck with the short story I'm working on, and I'm stuck with the plot. Plot gives me more trouble, but of course, plot comes from character. So I sit down, and I usually my writing exercise is to take my characters and say, what does character X want? And then that helps me figure out what character X will do next, and suddenly plot is happening. So what does your ant colony alien want?
So these are actually plants. So the individual plants do not move, but the collective intelligence shifts from one set of plants to a different set of plants. So it's this idea of an intelligence that views the world through multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And so what they want is to enhance the interaction with other species like humans in order to extend the possibilities of multiple perspectives.
Okay.
Right, so...
There you go. Character motivation. Plot. That's interesting. Do you have tricks for figuring out your characters?
I do. I tend to do in the old days it was index cards.
Yeah.
You know, so a kind of a index card style thing where you write a few details about each character.
Yeah.
So that you have, physical appearance, name,
Yeah.
a little bit of the back history, what planet they were born in the science fiction world, or where they come from, what the background is.
Yeah.
And something about their motivation.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the core from which I work when I'm actually writing the story. Do you do something like that? No?
No. I usually dive, you know me, I dive in and then I stop afterwards and do all of that excellent planning stuff. So that, what I described about getting stuck on a short story and then having to sit down and think about my character's motivation, what they want, that's pretty typical for me. An exception was that I'm working on a historical novel right now, and a lot of the characters are real people who really did exist back in the 19th century. And so I've been doing a lot of going onto genealogy websites to find out how many brothers and sisters they had, or finding out what their parents' professions were. And it's too much for me to hold in my head. So I've started a little notebook with a page for each character. When they were born, what their first job was, all the little details. I don't use it all, but it's there if I need it.
And do you find that easy to do or hard to do?
Hard to find the information?
No,
or
hard to write it out.
Oh. Well,
because I get bored doing it.
I do it in a bit of a scattershot way. I probably would be bored if I'd gone all the way through, but this is where my method, like I said, I do that organizational stuff further in, so it's usually because I've gotten stuck.
Right.
I've been writing for a while.
And then you're motivated. For the story that I did based on this work in Poland that I was doing, I knew what the message was for the story. Then I came up with characters. Yeah. And I knew I wanted a family. So I came up with 2 brothers and a sister, and they all had to be collaborators with the Germans somehow, doing different things. So I picked one brother who was a teacher, because I know about teaching, so that was, I knew I'd be able to handle that bit. I picked the sister to be a secretary, but working in the hospital, because I needed this connection to this hospital. Yeah. So that became clear. And then it was the third brother that I had trouble, the third sibling that I had trouble with, and he ended up becoming a policeman. Okay. Which I would not have planned out ahead of time. I wouldn't have sat down and said, he's a policeman. It came out of context, right? So once I had the characters, then I worked the plot into there. So, because now the woman has a connection to the hospital, and there's a whole sequence of stuff that had to happen at the hospital. So that was sort of set up. Plus the university bit was set up, and then the other one became the hooligan that became a policeman. Yeah. And that, of course, had its own story arc that was sort of emerged out of the character anyway. So.
Do you spend a lot of time working out backstories for your characters?
I spend some time working on backstories. Some of it's done ahead of time, and some of it's done as you're writing, and it just comes out from the writing, right? Yeah. But a bit like you, I'll generate some information, and then I'll need to consolidate it into some sort of official, formal way in order, because these are complex stories, they're multi-novel stories, and therefore they're, I've tried this before with these multi-novel things. If you don't write notes of what you've already done and written, and then you have to go back in and read the story to find out what you did in order to get it right in the other book, that's a little time waster. So if you can do it ahead of time, you save yourself a lot of grief later on.
Do you end up throwing away some of that material? Like you find out all these things about your characters, you build up your characters, and then it didn't make it into the final draft?
Sometimes. I don't think it happens a lot. Yourself?
I'm not throwing out a lot. I'm not very efficient in my writing. Lots of things get written about imagining things that have happened to them in the past that are affecting their decisions now, but the reader doesn't actually need that 3-page account of their childhood.
Okay, so that's maybe it for a character. We always want to come back to these. I always say we're going to come back to these things, but we probably won't.
I have a feeling character is going to crop up again.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah. But not next time. Next time we have a different subject planned.
So we're going to talk about short stories or short form writing.
It's different kinds of skills for different kinds of writing. Join us next time.
And look forward to seeing you again. And don't forget to click on the link to subscribe to the podcast if you like what we're doing. Bye-bye.